Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Blue Maxima. I won't keep you for too long, because I know that this is a horse that's already been beat to death already, but I feel like I have something to say. So, just to give you like a viewpoint as to what I think about this issue, I need to take you back to 2008 for a little bit. Because 2008 was when Saints Row 2 was released. We're skipping over Saints Row Run because it was basically just a clone of Grand Theft Auto. It was okay at best, and I never actually played it. I haven't played that much of Saints Row 2 either, but I've never had the opportunity. The PC port sucks, and I never had an Xbox 360 long enough to actually get my hands on it, so there you go. Hey Steam, Valve I should say, bring out the Steam Deck here so that I can actually play it on that, because apparently it works fine on it, but anyway. So when Saints Row 2 came out, it was 2008. We were in the middle of basically everything being brown, gritty, and realistic in both tone and visuals. So everything was just a shade of brown or a different shade of brown, and all the stories that they were trying to tell were all trying to be realistic. It was all trying to be that sort of moment where games would grow up. Remember that sort of dialogue that we had back in the day? Well, we, quote unquote, it was more the journalists more than anything, that were trying to convince games to grow up and tell more mature storylines, and how it was all feeling like they had their heads up so far up their ass, it looked like Nibbler eating himself to get out of the universe in Futurama. But yes, basically we were being saddled down with that for every AAA game out there. It was either brown or trying to be realistic or some combination of the two. And then on top of that, Jack Thompson hadn't been disbarred yet. So we had all sorts of crazy crap going on with that. Him trying to sue game publishers in order to, well, make some money, basically. He was a grifter. He was trying to convince people that video games do things to your kids. Two things. One, they don't. And two, even if they did, shouldn't be selling them to kids anyway. That's why we have the ESRB. We went over this 20-something years ago. Or oh my god, it's more like 40 at this point. Jesus Christ. Anyway, so we had all of that going on, and it ended up creating this weird culture where everything was trying to take itself seriously while simultaneously trying to not fall befoul of the outrage machine that the right had a bloody grip on at the time, like, for example, the whole Mass Effect fiasco. Yes, I romanced Liara in that game, what of it? So, the whole point of it is that it was feeling suppressive. It was feeling like all the fun was being sucked out of the AAA games industry. And then Saints Row 2 came along. It was bright, it was colourful, it was intensely gory and violent, it was over-the-top ridiculous, and it was fun. Which is an incredibly interesting thing to have right there and then at that time. And so it ended up going against pretty much everything the industry said you needed to succeed at that time. To be fair, it was still a Grand Theft Auto clone. And everyone was trying to do that. So, you know, expectations weren't exactly high. But then it came out and it hit like a dump truck. And not just because it was gory, violent, sexually charged and over the top and all of that, but because it did that and it was clever and witty at the same time. Because the writing was good, the gameplay was fun, and it didn't feel like it was being over the top for its own sake. It was serving the gameplay and the story it was trying to tell, and it's not like the game didn't have its own, like, heartwarming and heart-crushing moments at the same time. So, and not to mention, it was witty. It was incredibly witty. The writing was really good, and therefore, it justified all the toilet humor. Because the best way to justify toilet humor is to make it as witty as humanly possible, and Saints Row is a well-sized bucket of wit. And so as a result, Saints Row 2 was popular. And Saints Row 3 was even more popular. Some people consider it a step down, but to be fair, it's where I started in the series, and I absolutely love it. I will play Saints Row 3 again. I have played it like 6 times at this point. This isn't actually my footage though. This is from a channel called Full Playthroughs, by the way, because I just haven't had time to go and play through it again, if I'm being perfectly honest. So, it ended up going against everything that the industry wanted to be at that time. And it was successful for it. It filled a niche, even though that niche was an absolutely massive hole. And I'm not dunking on games like Call of Duty, or Gears of War, or Grand Theft Auto 4 for, like, being what they are. They're all good games, don't get me wrong. But it was clear they lost something in the transition to being more realistic, and hell, even Grand Theft Auto 5 agreed. So when Saints Row 2 and 3 came out, they filled a niche that a lot of people were looking for, and that's why they were as successful as they were. And of course, then we moved on to Saints Row 4, which was entirely its own thing, and I'd say it's a weird direction to go in, but then you look at Saints Row 2 and 3 and just the progression upwards of what they were doing and where they were going, and like, yeah, you know what, it makes sense, and they were still great in their own way, it and Gat Out of Hell, which I actually liked, but a lot of people like to pretend never happened. But then we had the 9-year gap, followed by Saints Row 2022. And that is where things get depressing. Now, I would have actually loved to have seen a Saints Row that actually followed the principles of Saints Row 2, 3, and 4, where you go against everything the industry is doing at the time. You basically just give it a gigantic middle finger. And this industry has been absolutely full of people decrying violence, again, for some reason, decrying sexuality under the guise of quote-unquote protecting women, which was never the case in the first place, and I'm not going to be the one to explain it here. I'm not intelligent enough to give it its due diligence. And doing a lot of things over and over and over again. Open worlds, certain traversal things, and just the culture of the entire thing just in an aggregate. Now, Saints Row 2022's major problem is that instead of going against everything the industry has already done in order to create not only an interesting setting and interesting characters, but to carve out its own niche the same way the originals did, it has fallen lockstep with the culture of today. And the culture of today sucks major ass to no end. These main characters are some of the most boring things imaginable. It was like you took a million tweets, put them into an AI bot, and said, generate me main characters out of this. There is absolutely no wit to them whatsoever, which just makes it feel like it's more in lockstep with today's culture. And it just comes off as absolute cringe. And it just makes me think, I already have enough of these people on Twitter, why do you have to put them in the video games as well? And the fact that they've stepped back on the over-the-top violence and the sexuality just makes it all the more worse. You know that it's done because it's the culture, and not because they're trying to go against that culture in order to be interesting. Even going so far as to rename series staples like Rim Jobs and turn it into Jim Robs, which is an anti-capitalist joke. What's the one thing that they keep going on about over and over again on game journalism blogs? It's capitalism. What's the one thing that Jim Sterling can never shut up about? Capitalism. What's the one thing that everybody who is left-leaning in this industry can never shut up about? It's capitalism. So, again, it's a joke that everybody else has been telling all this damn time. It's not funny, it's not witty, it's not clever, and the rest of the writing is exactly the same. And then, on top of that, when you have things like freckle bitches being turned into FBs, just purely because of the fact that someone would probably object to the word bitches in there somewhere, you know that it isn't going against the culture to be interesting. You know that it's in lockstep with the culture because it wants to be. And that's the worst part about it. It's not going against the grain. It's being with the grain and being incredibly boring as a result. And the funny thing is, Saints Row 2 and 3 still hold up today, not because of their gameplay, but because of their theme. And the reason why everybody's been complaining about the gameplay is because the theme just doesn't hold it up. Instead of having ridiculous over-the-top missions like driving with a bloody Jaguar in your seat, or spraying shit all over someone's bloody house in Saints Row 2, you have live-action role-playing as a theme for a mission with budget store Urkel. And they're clearly not trying to go against established trends. And this even goes so far as the gameplay. Like, for example, they gave everyone a wingsuit, which every single bloody game has at this point. It's been a thing since, like, Far Cry 4. And it just feels, especially when you've got bloody Saints Row, where you should be able to go and get a helicopter within 10 minutes of starting the game. Or in the case of Saints Row 4, you'll be able to jump so high and run so fast you don't even need a car. Just giving them wingsuits just seems like you're following industry trends. Setting it in an open world feels like you're following industry trends. And so as a result, at the end of the day, it's just boring. It's not doing anything interesting. It's not doing anything fun. It's in lockstep with a culture that a lot of people hate, including me. And so, it just doesn't do anything. Which is weird. Because it's Saints Row. The entire point of Saints Row is to be effervescent. It's supposed to be over the top. It's supposed to go against every single cultural norm at this point. But at the same time, there are a lot of ways that Saints Row couldn't really stand up to the culture of today. Because as I said before, it was nothing but brown back in 2008 for the most part, right? So when Saints Row came along and added some color back in, mainly purple, but you can't disagree with that, it was something that was fresh and exciting. Now every single bloody game underneath the sun has a Fortnite-inspired color palette. And therefore, even though the games are as dull as dishwater as they are before, you can't add color to them to at least try adding some spice and variety to the mix. And even things that are genuinely ridiculous, like, for example, the mission you're going to see at the end of this gameplay footage, it's with you and bloody... what's his face? I can never remember his bloody name. Whatever. Just getting dragged along by a bloody guy in bondage gear on the back of a horse cart while more of them follow you and you have to shoot back at them. All I have to think is go to a bloody gay pride parade, you'll see the same bloody thing. And it also doesn't help that we've been doing things like open worlds and jetpacks and other things like that for over a decade at this point. Yahtzee made a good point where he said, the open world is dead. There's nothing more that we can pull out of it. There's so little to really be made of the concept due to the limitations of the technology that we have, and it'll probably take a couple more generations before we can start doing anything really interesting with it. And even then, it would cost so much money that it probably wouldn't be worth it. So, as a result, Saints Row 2022 just completely fails to be what Saints Row was, which was over the top but clever about it, and completely divulging from the way the industry and the culture was going at the time, and it was successful. Saints Row 2022 is in lockstep with modern day culture. It is not counterculture, it is culture. And as a result, it's boring. Combine that with the fact that the gameplay can't hold up a boring theme, and it released buggy as hell, and it's really easy to see why it failed. I'll probably never play it. I have no reason to. I've still got Saints Row 1 and 2 to play. Alright, that's enough beating a dead horse. I'll see you all next time.